Yes, sir.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Radio Free Cannabis, coming to you from high in the hills of Oakland, California, translated into 198 different languages, connected to a worldwide network of activist correspondents. We are the voice of the global cannabis freedom movement, and I am your host, Steve DeAngelo. If you like what we're putting out here, please subscribe to the show and tell all your friends about us. Before we get into the rest of the show, I have a little personal news to share. My first book, The Cannabis Manifesto, has just been published in Brazil, in Portuguese, and you can find the links to purchase the book in the description of the show. And hot off the presses, my very first authorized biography, which is actually a coloring book, believe it or not, is now also available worldwide. Again, the links are in the description. In this episode, our activist correspondents are going to bring you reports from Asia, Africa, North America, and South America, illustrating once again the global reach and rapidly growing momentum of the cannabis freedom movement, including coverage from what we believe is the first public cannabis demonstration ever to take place in the nation of Japan. Our tribe is present in every part of the world, and in every part of the world, we are rising, even in places where prohibition still lays heavy upon us, even where speaking out still carries the risk of prison. We'll hear from some of our friends who are driving that process of change forward in just a few minutes. First, we'll take a look at the most important cannabis news of the day. We open on a sad note, unfortunately. Our most urgent headlines by far come from Malaysia, which continues its insane war on Mother Nature's most valuable plant. Since Radio Free Cannabis reported on the outrageous death penalty case of Dr. G in Malaysia in our last episode, there have been additional cannabis arrests in the country, with more death sentences threatened and even imposed. On September 3rd, Mohammed Hafidul Rafiz Emi was sentenced to death for smuggling 299 grams of cannabis into the country by a judge named Datuk Colin Lawrence Sequeira. Emi and his relatives in the courtroom understandably burst into tears upon hearing the news. Then, barely a week later, Malaysian police arrested a Kuala Lumpur couple for manufacturing cannabis edibles and providing them to close friends via social media. The cops seized 156 packages of biscuits, 94 cannabis cakes, 8 packages of raw cannabis, and 31 kg of what appears to be infused cannabis oil, then filed cannabis charges that could result in the death penalty. The couple's currently being held on death row, along with at least 213 other people convicted of controlled substance offenses. This state-sponsored reign of anti-cannabis terror then continued into the third week of September, when Malaysian police targeted a couple who were simply growing a few plants in their own condominium. Now, even under Malaysian law, this offense didn't qualify for the death penalty, so the cops had to settle for charging the couple with offenses that require a mandatory life sentence and public whipping instead. Now, this kind of news tends to awaken a sense of unreality in people living in parts of the world with more sane cannabis laws. But the danger is very real. According to Harm Reduction International, 30 people have been executed worldwide on controlled substance charges in the last year alone, with an unknown number of them being for cannabis charges. What makes this situation feel even more bizarre, but also a bit more hopeful, is that a leading Malaysian university, UNIMAP, has just signed a a memorandum of understanding to begin researching the viability of legal cannabis crops in Malaysia. So perhaps the first tentative steps towards change are being made. We certainly hope so and send our very best wishes and strongest prayers to all of our sisters and brothers in Malaysia, especially those still in prison. In Nepal, the nation's leading cannabis freedom activist, Rajiv Kafle, was arrested and imprisoned on cannabis charges on September 6th, apparently after workers at one of his businesses were allegedly found in possession of less than 100 grams of cannabis. Nepal has a very long history with cannabis and was one of the last countries in the world to make it illegal. That happened only in 1974 and only in response to intense pressure from the United States. And in March of 2020, a measure to re-legalize cannabis and create a legal industry was submitted to Parliament, where it was still being debated at the time of our brother Rajiv's arrest. But the days of our tribe just accepting this kind of brutality and injustice are over. Over. Rajiv's supporters were quick to pull together a demonstration to demand his release, something I've never heard about happening in Nepal before. It's a great step forward, and I applaud everyone who was involved in making the demonstration happen. We are beginning to stand up all over the world, including in places that haven't seen much public activism until now. We're mad as hell, and we're not going to take it anymore. Meanwhile, in North America, legalization continues to take form despite the best efforts of the federal government to delay the inevitable. On the East Coast of the United States, the neighboring states of New York and New Jersey are locked in a race to be the first to launch their legal industry, each of them eager to draw in tax revenues from the other state. So far, it looks like New Jersey is ahead. Voters there legalized cannabis with a referendum process a year ago, and the state regulatory agency has just released their rules for the legal industry. In New York, where the disgraced former governor, Mario Cuomo, had blocked legalization efforts for years, the new law was enacted by the legislature rather than by a vote of the people, and that only happened in April of this year. But the new governor, Katherine Hochul, seems determined to make up for lost time. Upon taking office, she almost immediately saw to the appointment of all remaining members of the Cannabis Regulatory Commission that will develop the New York version of the regulations just released by New Jersey. So the race is on. We are happy to report that big changes are underway today in my ancestral homeland of Italy. Activists there have qualified a referendum that, if successful, will repeal all of Italy's prohibitions on growing psychoactive plants for personal use. This would include cannabis, of course, but also psychedelic mushrooms and cacti. Assuming the referendum clears any remaining procedural hurdles, the public will vote on the measure in spring of 2022. Public support for passage seems strong, with activists having collected over 500,000 signatures for the referendum in under 1 week. Once passed, the legislation will end criminal penalties for most cannabis-related activities, but will not establish a legal regulated industry. Because Italy's referendum process only allows voters to delete laws they don't like, legislation to actually create and regulate a legal industry will need to come from the Parliament. The gigantic global corporation Amazon is also rapidly warming up to cannabis. On September 21st, the company formally endorsed legalization in its home country of the United States, following a June announcement that it would no longer subject its workers to urine testing for cannabis consumption. In its statement, Amazon called cannabis prohibition unfair and untenable, and also announced it would rehire workers previously fired for cannabis use. Most observers of the legal cannabis industry, including me, believe that Amazon is positioning itself to enter the industry once interstate and international commerce in cannabis is legalized. Amazon's entry to the industry would be extremely disruptive to existing cannabis businesses, but at the same time would massively increase public accessibility to cannabis. Another set of very mixed blessings, another set of difficult choices for our tribe to consider. We'll close out today's headlines with a couple of cute stories that illustrate the progress that's been made dialing down cannabis stigma. The first is the news that the California State Fair, an official agency of the state of California, has invited cannabis cultivators to exhibit at the fair along with the farmers of other crops. And, as with other crops, the fair will be awarding prizes to the best cannabis crops. So the state of California finally catches up with the High Times Cannabis Cup and the Emerald Cup, 3 decades late to the party, but hey, better late than never. We welcome them warmly, just like we welcome all newcomers to the cannabis tribe. Now, the next bit of news is even cuter. The most powerful law enforcement agency in the United States, the FBI, quietly updated their employment requirements this month. Under the previous policy, any cannabis use after the age of 18 would disqualify candidates for employment. But the new policy specifies that candidates can consume cannabis up to 24 times and still be hired. The agency failed to specify how it decided on the 24 experience threshold, or how it would calculate the number of times in situations like smoking 2 joints in one evening or 12 bong hits over the course of a couple hours, but hey, who's counting anyway? Certainly not our friends in the Emerald Triangle, the source of our first feature story tonight. Even if they were inclined to do something as silly as count the number of times they consume cannabis, they lately have been way too busy fighting off the very real effects of climate change to bother with that kind of nonsense. Please be advised that this report from Swami Chaitanya in Mendocino County does refer to events in early and mid-September. Some of the fires have been brought under control since then, so be sure to check the current situation before offering assistance.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me back on the show. This is Swami Chaitanya. I'm reporting from Emerald Triangle in Northern California. So as many of you probably know, the big story right now are the wildfires all over California. There's at least a dozen fires going. The 2 biggest ones are up in the Sierra Nevada, and the one that gets the most publicity, of course, is the one around Lake Tahoe. The entire town of Lake Tahoe, 22,000 people, has been evacuated, and many of the homes up on the mountains are at risk. We have some friends up there in Tahoe Wellness Center, and we hope they're all doing well. They've got a whole cannabis operation there, and we hope that that survives. There are other dispensaries and many, many growers up there as well. So all the best. Up north, a little further north, is the Dixie Fire, and that's actually 1,100 square miles. They don't measure them in acres anymore. They measure them in square miles. So these fires happen very fast. They move very fast. That area north also has many, many growers, both the illegal market and the traditional market, as we say. So we're wishing them all the best. Now, if you're in the threat area, it's time to evacuate, but you can also do some preparation for the fire. We have a defensible space of 100 feet around any structures in any garden that you wish to do. You cut off the lower branches on trees up to 6 feet and even closer near the house. You want to keep your water tanks full in case you need them. We actually put in a little mini fire hydrant next to our house, and we even have a little trailer with a water tank and a transfer pump as a mini fire thing. Up here on Bell Springs Road, where we live in Mendocino County, we have our own little fire brigade. Volunteers happening. I'm a little too old to be down in the trenches, but we support them when they have fundraisers. And it was a good thing because earlier in August, there was a small fire down right off 101, and our little fire brigade responded really fast, and some helicopters came in. So they put that fire out within 50 acres, but it saved a whole lot of people, a whole lot of problem. We were under voluntary evacuation, but in the end, it was okay. But last year, we actually had to evacuate for a couple of days because the smoke was so bad up here in August of 2020. The fires were about 15 miles away, and there was white ash falling everywhere, and the sky was black. I have a feeling it might have stunted the yield on the crop, but other than that, we didn't find any smoke damage. We also blew off the ashes that were falling like snow with a leaf blower. And then at harvest, we actually then had a 55-gallon drum diluted with hydrogen peroxide and water, and we dipped each plant in the water, in the hydrogen peroxide, and then we rinsed it off with pure water before we hung it up to dry. And so as a result, we didn't have anything that failed any tests for microbial or smoke or anything like that. So that's a precaution you can take. Now, up in Willow Creek, which is north of here up in Humboldt County, there is a fire going. It's about 1,000 acres was the last report. The problem is that there's no firefighters up there. They're all dedicated to the big fires at Lake Tahoe and also in the Dixie Fire in the Sierras. So a Cal Fire inspector came and said this fire wasn't really big enough for them to be worried about. So they're fighting it all on their own. And so they need help evacuating some of their animals as they have. Also, some of them need to get flour out and even cash out. If you have flour, the California law allows you to move that under emergency situations. You can move it yourself to a distributor, but you have to make sure you tell them and make sure you check on exactly how to do that. If anybody really has an extra bulldozer or shovels, or you feel like you want to help and you're physically capable, remember there's heat and so on, you can volunteer and help them to fight this fire. They're kind of on their own up there. All those other people in the rest of the state, in Southern California, there's fires as well. The fire up in Lake Tahoe, they got about 15,000 people fighting that fire with helicopters and fire engines from all over the states. It's really serious. And now the fire we had last year was the August Complex fire. And that one happened by many, many lightning fires, striking fires, and 10 or 20 or 30 or even 100 fires coagulate and join together. And that's why they call it a complex fire. That burned over 1 million acres, approximately 1% of this land area of California. So these things are quite serious, and they really are part of the climate change that we're witnessing. So you want to make sure you have plenty of water around, and make sure you're looking after your plants and get out if it's ready to get out. Now, there are other things happening in California now also with the cannabis market, which is the fact there's a glut on the market of new product coming out from Light Dep. A whole bunch of grows came online in Southern California. They flooded the market with kind of medium grade flour. So all the wholesale prices are down. We've heard $700, even $500 a pound. It's making it very difficult for the small craft farmer. So we're asking all of you out there to support your craft farmer, the legacy growers who are doing it organically and with regenerative methods. For many of the people up here in the Emerald Triangle, we're all trying our best to be environmentally sound. And we have a way, when we grow, we have a much less carbon footprint than any other industry in agriculture. We use less water than any other agricultural product. So we've been blamed for a lot of things, but actually we are environmentally very, very responsible. We have to be inspected by Fish and Wildlife. We have to get licensed for our water and all of those things. So we feel we're doing our part. We can always do more and always do better, but we're growing regeneratively. So we ask you to take care of your craft farmers and buy their product in the stores. So the other thing now with your crew, you want to make sure that you have your crew protected as well if they're in any fire zone. If it's really serious, of course, evacuate them, but make sure they have proper fire masks. Make sure you also have plenty of water available for them to drink and so on, and keep them out of the heat. But if there is a fire, it's really best to get everybody out. But the key thing is take care of your crew and make sure that everybody's safe. So I guess that's about it for today, Steve. It's not the best news, but we're gonna carry on through, and we're gonna help each other. And that's what we've always done up in the mountains here. We've always taken care of each other. Our hearts go out to all those people who are evacuating and fighting the fire, and just stay calm and be true. So thank you very much, Steve, and talk to you then later.
Thanks very much, Swami. Since Swami filed his report, the Caldor fire that was threatening the town of South Lake Tahoe has been contained. Residents have been allowed to return home, and our friends at the Tahoe Wellness Center are safe. The larger Dixie fire has also been mostly contained, but many legacy cannabis farms in the Willow Creek area of Humboldt County and in remote areas of Trinity County are still under threat and evacuation orders. We have a saying in the United States that whatever starts in California eventually makes its way to the rest of the country, and I think that's especially true with cannabis. All of us, the entire cannabis tribe, should take heed and pay attention to the squeeze that climate change is putting on California cannabis growers. Given that prohibition has long forced cannabis cultivation into remote and forested regions all over the world, growers in many other places will soon be dealing with fire preparations and fire recovery if they're not dealing with it already. And of course, all of us should do everything we can to spread the news that every hectare of hemp that is harvested sequesters up to 20 tons of atmospheric carbon. So planting more cannabis is one of the best ways to cool down the planet. Moving now to Japan, we are delighted to present our first report from RasNobu and his team of freedom fighters, who will bring us up to date on the current situation in Japan and tell us how that historic first demonstration went.
Hi. Thank you, Steve. Your pen is mine. Your pen is mine. Your pen is mine. Your pen is mine. I say your pen is mine. Your pen is mine. Greeting in the name of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie, Jah Rastafari. Yes, I'm a RasNobu, and Japanese cannabis tribe people had cannabis protesting in Japan the other day. Just because I get many weak people, boys who need weed right now. And then my secretary, Sakura, going to report you about this demonstration. Listen.
Japan is one of the few countries in the world with the strictest crackdown on marijuana. The Japanese government is going against the world's trend of deregulating marijuana by seeking to make the punishment for marijuana use more severe due to the abuse of marijuana by young people. In California, marijuana for medical purposes was legalized in 1996, but even medical marijuana is still illegal in Japan. So RasNobu, the movement's leader, organized a protest on September 10th to bring the anger, sorrow, and grief of those who need marijuana in Japan directly to the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare. On the scene, there were about 50 people, and for the first time in Japan, the protest was connected through social networking services, and we were able to get people from all over Japan to join this protest. I also had the privilege to make my voice heard through Clubhouse, and Clubhouse, there were about 60 listeners and speakers who had their opinion. On YouTube, there were 2 channels broadcasting it live. There were about 100 people who watched that. On Tweetcasting, there were about 50 people. And also on Instagram Live, there were also 60 people. It was a very powerful connection. So, and coincidentally, September 10th was World Suicide Prevention Day. And unfortunately, Japan is famous as a country with many suicides. And this can be attributed to the side effects of psychotropic drugs. Many of Japan's recreational marijuana users are afraid of strict marijuana regulations and do not actively participate in the prohibition movement, hoping that only they can smoke it in secret. We can all understand that the ban on marijuana should be lifted for medical purposes. Your pain is mine. RasNobu stood up for the patients who needed marijuana. And on the day of the event, DeAngelo Hasse shared the stories through the Smokers Story Project, which is a project led by Green Zone Japan and Hideo Nagayoshi, an author of cannabis-related books. Let's hear from Dai.
デモでは、病気で苦しんでいる人、心の病で苦しんでいる人たち、そういった人たちが実際に大麻を使って救われたっていうリアルなストーリーを届けさせてもらいました。で、実際にこの声が届いているか定かではありませんが、厚生労働省の方々や通行人の人たちに、この声を届けることができてよかったと思っています。そしてこの声がもっと日本中のいろんな人に届けば嬉しいなと思っております。はい。
His mission is to interview and share all smokers' stories, and he says he was happy to let the people hear what everyone had to say and hopes to continue to do so. And big respect to you, Steve, for your speech on Instagram Live. And we sincerely hope that everyone in the cannabis tribe will support us in the mission to get rid of the ban on marijuana in Japan. Thank you.
Get up, stand up.
What a beautiful sight to see. Cannabis freedom is spreading everywhere. Our movement is rising in places where it's never been seen before, more and more places every day. The power of the cannabis plant to cross borders and languages, to bring us all together in one culture of love and respect, is an awesome and powerful thing. Sister Sakura, Brothers Dai and RasNobu, I promise you on behalf of the whole global tribe that we will do everything that we can as you begin to rise up and defend your rights. Thank you for taking the time and making the effort to send us this inspiring story. We look forward to your next report and your next demonstration. We now turn our attention to South America, where our good friend Javier Hasse will update us on the gradual but continuing process of cannabis reform in Argentina.
Thank you, Steve. I am very happy to be joining Radio Free Cannabis from the beautiful country of Argentina. Today I'm going to share some details on how our medical cannabis program is looking and a little bit about the future and what we can and might expect. Argentina passed a medical cannabis law in 2017, but it took about 3 years to get the regulations in place. So between 2017 and 2020, most cannabis patients could access only imported cannabis products through a special permit from a judge. That changed in 2020 when the regulations finally came out. they stipulate a few very interesting things. The first one is home growing. You can grow your own cannabis. And this was a priority and one of the measures that was most important to activists in the country. Organizations like Mamá Cultiva Argentina, whom I know you know well, were instrumental to the passing of the law. And one of their main, causes was for home cultivation or home growing to be allowed. The 2020 regulations also allow for the development of cannabis companies, but only in partnership with a state entity, right? Whether it's a provincial government, a state government, or the federal government, or a federal government entity, but you need some kind of official support. For people who want to grow their cannabis, there's a registry called Referendum. You need a doctor's order to get enlisted into this registry, but once you do, you can grow your own cannabis at home legally. You can also enroll in Referendum as a caregiver, right, where you can grow cannabis for other patients, but you cannot be a patient yourself when operating as a caregiver. Separately, there is a new law that is being discussed and might be passed soon that would allow for the production of industrial hemp, which again, I know, Steve, you love industrial hemp. So there might be a huge opportunity there. The same law also considers the industrial scale production of medical cannabis, right? As I mentioned, up to this point, you can only produce medical cannabis on an industrial scale in partnership with the state. But that would change with the new law that would allow for private enterprises to start their own cultivation businesses, their own retail businesses, etc. So the situation looks pretty upbeat and promising in many ways. Of course, there's a lot to be done yet, starting with expungement and just letting people out of prison for nonviolent cannabis offenses. I wish we had something like the Last Prisoner Project in Argentina. I'm sure we'll bring it over soon enough. And then on the adult use front, some progress has been seen. Several big mayoral candidates have spoken for the legalization of adult use cannabis. And even the president of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, spoke about adult use cannabis in a couple occasions in recent weeks and said he believes that we at least should have a debate as a civilized nation regarding whether we want to make adult use or recreational cannabis legal. And his argument is, considering alcohol and tobacco are legal and the benefits of cannabis far outweigh the benefits of alcohol, tobacco, while the risks seem lower, he doesn't see a reason for cannabis to remain illegal. But of course, that will have to be discussed, and it will probably take a few years till we see an adult use cannabis law materialize. But in the meantime, what we are seeing are big advancements on the medical cannabis front. So we'll keep you posted on that. This has been Javier Hasse, CEO of El Planteo and Managing Director of Nzinga, reporting for Radio Free Cannabis from Argentina. Salud.
Salud, Javier. Thanks very much for updating us, and congratulations on the progress. Argentina seems to be moving forward in a careful and measured way, more slowly than many of us would like, but far from the worst situation cannabis activists are dealing with around the world. I just want to focus for a moment on the home growing feature of the Argentine law, because I think it's important for activists everywhere to push to make legal home growing a basic feature of all cannabis laws. The reason I feel that way is that the legal regulated cannabis industry being put in place in North America and other places is usually burdened with extreme regulations and very high taxes. The result is that cannabis products from these sources are extremely expensive, often beyond the financial reach of most people. This is bad enough in places like California, where legal regulated cannabis costs 2 or 3 times as much as cannabis available in the informal traditional market. But it becomes really outrageous in places where the only legal available source of cannabis comes from companies like GW Pharma that charge thousands of euros for a few months' supply. The only effective check on this kind of predatory pricing is to ensure that all citizens, that everybody, everywhere, is allowed to exercise their natural right to grow their own cannabis. So please, if you're working on reform legislation in your country, make sure it includes home growing. Our last feature today comes from South Africa, where our longtime Radio Free Cannabis correspondent, Sibusiso Xaba, is going to bring us up to speed on his country's recently released master plan for the legalization of cannabis.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be back reporting for Radio Free Cannabis. The South African Department of Agriculture presented the country's National Cannabis Master Plan to South Africa's Parliament last week, aimed at developing the $1.9 billion industry. The National Master Plan, which has been in development for around 2 years, aims to create a comprehensive framework by which South Africa's cannabis industry can be developed. The efforts by government were led by the Department of Agriculture in consultation with various national and provincial government departments, as well as the private sector and labor. Government believes that the cannabis industry has the potential to create between 10 and 25,000 jobs over the next few years. South Africa, which last week published unemployment data, now has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world at 34.4%. The progression of the cannabis industry could not have come at a more opportune time. The National Master Plan consists of 9 pillars, including legislation, seed supply and development, producer development and support, manufacturing and product development, market and export development, research and technology development, supplier development and support, education and training, and communication and awareness. The plan is truly comprehensive and includes the development of a robust medical, industrial, and adult use market. It also addresses the need to support smallholder farmers who are currently growing cannabis in the illicit market and have been doing so for decades. South Africa is estimated to have over 900,000 rural and smallholder farmers who are actively cultivating cannabis as a means of income. South Africa has made steady progress in establishing a cannabis industry over the last 3 years, including the allowance of CBD sales and the issuance of medical cannabis cultivation licenses for exports. From October 2021, South Africa will begin accepting applications for commercial hemp permits, which should see the slow emergence of a local hemp industry. With regards to South Africa's cannabis ambitions, the devil is truly in the detail. For example, the 0.2% THC limit that's being proposed by government is likely too low for hemp cultivation in South Africa, where the climate tends to result in cannabis that grows well above this limit, making the viability of a large-scale hemp industry extremely challenging. We hope that government considers the practical implications of their proposed regulations rather than simply adopting regulations implemented in Europe and other parts of the world. Further industry consultation and engagement from government is needed to ensure that the master plan roadmap truly positions South Africa to be a global cannabis powerhouse that can lift many South Africans from poverty in the time when the country needs it most. This is Sibs from Africa Cannabis Advisory Group reporting for Radio Free Cannabis.
Thank you, Sibs. It's good to hear that change is coming to South Africa, and especially good to hear that the interests of small farmers are being stressed in the national plan. Your report, and Javier's, really brings home to me how important it is for us to get the details right as we go about this process of legalization. Because prohibition was imposed globally by the United States and its allies, there's a tendency in many countries to blindly adopt international standards instead of developing their own rules and regulations. But many of those international standards were developed under prohibition, or by countries still dominated by prohibitionist thinking. So local activists need to keep their eyes on details. Details like making sure the THC threshold for industrial hemp isn't impossible to meet under local weather conditions. As we get ready to close out this episode of Radio Free Cannabis, I am once again struck by the geographic scope of our movement and by how that movement is accelerating, growing in momentum, rising up visibly in places where until very recently, the cannabis tribe still remained hidden, still stuck in the shadows. I am tremendously inspired to see cannabis demonstrations happening now in Japan and Nepal, and even the beginnings of cannabis activism in places like Malaysia, places that still sentence people to death for being part of the cannabis tribe. And of course, I'm saddened and outraged that those who do have the courage to stand up, like our brother Rajiv in Nepal, and our arrested sisters and brothers in Malaysia, and our brother Albert Tio in Spain, and the 40,000 people in the United States who still sit behind bars. But here is what I know, and I send these words especially to those of you who may be in challenging circumstances because of your relationship with cannabis. We are a global tribe. Hundreds of millions of us worldwide have experienced the benefits of the cannabis plant. We have drawn the same lessons from those experiences, and from those experiences developed a common value system. That common value system allows us to reach across all the borders that usually divide human beings, the borders of race and language and nationality, just as we have together here today. Chief among our values is a determination to build a healthy planet, ruled by love and at peace with itself. That includes all of us, each and every one of us. So no matter where you are, no matter how difficult your situation may be, remember that change is coming. We will not rest and we will not stop until we get all the way home. Finally, I'd like to let you all know about a few public appearances I'll be making in the near future. On September 29th, I'll be at the Business of Cannabis New York Conference at the Rainbow Room of the Rockefeller Center, participating in a panel discussion on diversity in New York's legal industry. On October 8th, I will be keynoting the grand opening of the Stone Age Immersive Cannabis Experience, also in New York City. Then, on October 21st, join me at the inaugural MJ Unpacked Conference in Las Vegas, where I'll have a fascinating conversation with branding guru Siobhan Bunch, the man behind the Coach Handbag Company and Tory Burch Shoes. And then that evening, I'll be introducing the Blues Brothers and some very special guests for a concert at the Mandalay Bay Resort and Casino. There's nothing in the world I like doing more than meeting up with my sisters and brothers from the global cannabis tribe. So if you can make it to one of these events, please be sure to come say hello to me. Until then, be well and stay free.